All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Punk Punk Goose Show on WMUC 88.1 FM in College Park, Maryland. Today, we have a special interview that we're doing. We're interviewing Paul Baker of the Colorado Gothic Rock Post Punk band Redwing Blackbird. How are you today, Paul?
I'm good, Vivek. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm enjoying life.
Very good.
So let's get this going. So tell me about yourself and tell me how Redwing Blackbird was formed.
Okay. Well, in a nutshell, I'm a Colorado based for the last decade. Single man with synth. I guess the term for it at one point was neo folk. When you're doing more synth based stuff, I don't like the use of neo. It just has a lot of bad incarnations coming out of the Trump administration right now. So I kind of leave that to that. The project, I kind of see it. I'm a little bit older at doing this. I played in multiple genres. Starting out in goth in an early '90s, I was in a band called Second Skin out of Phoenix, Arizona, um, and that was kind of my first introduction to playing live. Was in that band. My first ever show was supporting Roz Williams' Shadow Project. So it was the first time in front of yeah, it was like my first time kind of being thrown to the lions, and that was in my mid 20s. So now with having a full kind of spectrum of a career, I went the way of kind of dark folk for a period of time, and I kind of felt that I was like retiring early in a way. You know what I mean? I still had a lot of things that in that specific. I mean, you could go the Woody Guthrie route. You could do that, but I like to build things. I like to work soundscape sonically. So I think what Redwing Blackbird was almost kind of the old school political backlash form of art in my propaganda, kind of seeing that all art essentially is propaganda. I directly kind of focused this on. I started it. The first song I wrote was on Trump's inauguration, just in a protest song called Capitalist Hands against the white Christian nationalist movement, basically, that's kind of happening globally. Um, it's taken root in places like Greece, etc., across the board. So it definitely was a very pro leftist kind of in the tradition of the Clash, you know, in Jello Biafra, some of my early influencers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I didn't think that element was really necessarily happening, not necessarily in punk music anymore, outside of, as it was in our younger days, I guess. And I'm kind of rambling, but
No, I want you to
um,
ramble. I want you to ramble.
great. So that was kind of the start of Redwing Blackbird. Was I wanted to be a little bit more noisy, a little bit more politically minded, and a little bit more outspoken in a sense on the first record, which was Too Close for Comfort. I did that in 2019. I released that one. It had a body of songs. I did a self-made video for it. Started kind of getting some good feedback on that. Was picking up a little bit of traction, and then the pandemic hits. We were doing a tour with Michael Aston's Gene Loves Jezebel up until that March of 2020, I believe it was, when the pandemic first hit.
Yeah.
So it's like right there you start getting some momentum, and then bam, we're all kind of isolated. So I had some time to kind of refine the approach. I am a solo performer, and a lot of solo performers right now are more synth based in what I'm doing, but I've always written from a perspective of the guitar. So whether I was playing punk or metal in the early '80s or whatever it was, so in a way, I've been, in a way, because of some of my past and some of the projects I've played live with, accepted here in the Denver community, pretty much in the goth scene here. But I kind of see the Redwing Blackbird as a culmination of everything that I've done since my early 20s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, I have no problem playing with a funk band, or you know what I mean. I'm not genre specific to where I'm only going to get on the bill with industrial or goth or post punk guys.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit kind of, we need to come out of this pandemic playing live again a little bit more diverse. If music's going to make a healthy comeback.
Yeah.
I love playing with metal guys. I love playing shows with metal shows. I love adding an element of diversity, or having that element of diversity in our shows, or even
Yeah.
a synth pop band, or even a reggae band if they can hold their own.
Yeah.
Um, there's not a lot of that here in Denver though. So
Really?
yeah, where
So
are you
how
out of actually?
I am out of Washington D.C. I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is basically a stone's throw away from Washington D.C. But
Yeah, okay.
but like cuz the thing is the East Coast, like you've I don't know how many times you've been to the East Coast, but like the Northeast especially is such a compact area that it's easy to get around. Like I can go up to Philly within 2 to 3 hours. I can go to New York in
Yeah,
4. I can go to New York in 4, and there's always Baltimore, which is only 40 minutes from where I am. So
right.
when yeah, so when I try to go to like, whatever it may be, metal, punk, goth, it's fairly easy. Like if a show skips over DC, all right, well how about Richmond? Okay, no Richmond. What about Philadelphia? Philadelphia, let's go. Let's make a trip out of it.
Absolutely. Plus, DC has the legendary whole Discord, punk history with
Oh,
it.
of
So
course.
just the
Yeah.
music history there is fantastic. Denver
Yeah.
is interesting because it's kind of an island unto itself. You have some really fantastic Americana pickers, really seasoned players up here, but they're very content with being big fish in the town of Denver, because the nearest other city is Austin or Vegas. So there's not a
Really?
lot of, yeah, it's interesting. You'd think that there'd be a lot more traveling with some really fantastic bands, but a lot of them really don't. You do have great ones that have came out of here. There's like Woven Hand is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Devotchka's made some great noise. Slim Cessna's Auto Club. Those are kind of the forefathers of what's considered here as the Denver sound. I moved here kind of as an outsider from Phoenix, having supported those bands when they came through Phoenix. So they almost, in a way, kind of set an example of how to leave the bubble, in the early 2000s and mid 2000s. You know,
Gotcha.
so that was kind of something that I thought that I could do with Redwing Blackbird, focusing more as a one person performance. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier. We have the technology today. I can always hire people if I need a synth player or a bass player,
Yeah.
but it's not, I'm no longer waiting to see if the bass player's wife will let him go on the road for a week. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
I'm self-contained in all of my affairs, and with
Yeah.
is how competitive things are musically right now. You got to have your success. You got to be ready when it finds you. Like if you I got asked to do this weird showcase like 2 nights ago for New Year's. I normally if I wasn't ready, that would, in a whole band, that takes at least 3 days to get everybody to confirm. I don't
Yeah.
have to do that. So it's being able to be more effective in my output and in at least getting out live. Because I think in the next couple of decades, personally, there's going to be a lot of people hitting the road again pretty hard, wanting to get
Yeah.
out, you
Yeah.
know? So you got to be ready. It's going to be, you got to be ready in your own game, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's an interesting way you look at it. So, in terms of the scene overall, what do you think of the current goth scene in the states at least right now? Do you think as it if it's making a comeback, or do you think it's becoming more stagnant, or do you think it's declining?
I, you know, it's kind of reinventing itself in a lot of interesting ways. A lot of the purists, and it's the same in every city. People get upset with the gothic cliques or the various, groups of various sects or whatever.
Yeah.
You get frustrated because only a certain number of people will come to your shows here and there sometimes because of the clickiness, but it's the same all around.
Yeah.
And I think that people are writing really good dark music right now. I think Chelsea Wolfe released a lot, or, a couple of years ago, released some fantastic stuff
Yeah.
that a lot of the more traditional goths are a little bit hesitant or even to accept in the pure, because there is that sense of purism, which, I mean, goth unfortunately it's been criticized a lot, at least the goth movement has, of being somewhat of a fashion show. And I can see that argument, but that's not to take away that there's some fantastic art coming out of it. I think
Yeah.
like She Passed Away is a great act out of Turkey.
Yeah.
Our friends in Twin Tribes
Oh,
is
they're great.
fantastic.
Lebanon, Hanover, if you're into them.
Yes,
Yeah.
and again, we have Woven Hand. David Eugene Edwards was, he's worked with Crime in the City Solution, and you see him doing more stuff in overseas in Europe right now than really in the States, except until the last couple of years. He's been working on a record, but so it's back to Redwing Blackbird. It's been, kind of coming from Phoenix. You're familiar with the East Coast. I've been back there, Pittsburgh, a couple places, but never spent a great deal of time to understand. I have relatives and whatnot, how your guys' culture is. I'm
Yeah.
sure it's a lot more intense because of the population.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, here on our end, in the Southwest, I came up in Phoenix, and we would always travel between Phoenix, West LA, Austin, Albuquerque. That was kind of our roaming area coming
Gotcha.
up most because we didn't have good enough vehicles to make it over the Rockies come wintertime to go into the Midwest in our earlier years. It's
Wow. Man,
looking at in your early stuff.
oh
So,
my God.
but it's not too different. It's just it's just different players. You can there's almost a script sometime of the local promoter guy, the local set of DJs guys. There's always, in every town like Phoenix or Denver. But Denver has a fantastic goth scene. I won't lie. It's gotten, there's a ton of really good solid bands here. I'm thinking of my friends in Church Fire is fantastic. They're killing it right now here. I wouldn't say they're even so much goth as just more, experimental. I got another synth pop friend of mine who does great electronic stuff named Jake with Faces Under the Mirror. F is another great industrial band. You have Radio Scarlet. There's a lot of there's a great scene here, and I would like to see more bands just kind of get ready to travel outside of and leave the bubble.
Okay. So you want more bands to like be actual like touring bands instead of like, hey, let's just.
Yeah.
Okay.
And all these bands are, and they're potentially capable of it. But I think that what's happening in a lot of, I can see it as on the level of people get really content with what they're getting because we get a lot of bands coming through town,
Yeah.
I just did a show with Curse Mackey here in town for he's a fantastic guy to work with. Him and Rona, his partner, are really cool. I definitely recommend seeing them live. But that, you have a lot of those types of bands coming through at any given time, so there's always different opportunities. There's so many bands and only so many promoters bringing this stuff to here. It almost kind of bottlenecks,
Yeah.
and you can get really frustrated in a scene when you're not getting put on shows by various promoters because there's 50 other bands that you're kind of up against for these specific venues that are doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I personally have found the best way to kind of work around that is just book yourself in other markets. If you don't have a show in Denver that month, take it down to Albuquerque, and it just keeps your game sharper, and it helps the overall kind of scene here in Denver expand. I think of all the stuff that was happening out of like Seattle and Portland in the mid 90s, going, not even going into grunge and whatnot. You had like Hitting Birth and Crash Worship and all these bands from that region of the country just doing incredible things. And you knew this because they were coming to warehouses in your city, so you knew of what was happening just outside of, we have a combination of both Facebook and this incredible ability now to really reach other places. I hope to see some of the younger guys doing that more,
So, all right. So let's go. Yeah. So going back to Red. No, no, no. I like what you're saying. Again, if whatever, just ramble on, ramble on.
Okay.
So, well, going to Redwing Blackbird and talking about your musical origins, I prior to the interview, I was basically doing a crash course in Redwing Blackbird. I just crammed the records into my head as much as I could. One thing I really liked is like the way you were able to like, and I remember reading an interview that you did with one of the local Denver magazines. I think it was called Westward or whatever.
Yeah, that was probably with John Bear.
Okay, so that was with John Bear. I read that interview and you talk about like how how like Redwing Blackbird is influenced by a lot of punk in addition to the goth and post punk that you listen to. And I was able to hear that. So like how do you compose a song? Cuz like there would be like I forget which song on the first record that you did, Two Clouds for Comfort. One of the songs straight has like, a Minor Threat style thrash be like
absolutely. Yeah, that's Klaus.
Yeah.
It comes from all of that. I think during that whole period, I was listening to like I was reliving the glory of like Fugazi's Blueprint, and I was like, that element kind of needs to go in. I would like to start out with that urgency, of that
Yeah.
album,
Yeah.
and kind of and we have so many great people are into like audio, and the recording process and all that in itself, and they want to make crystal clear recordings. But I feel for my own art, it's going to be a progression. Obviously, every recording is going to be better than the next.
Yeah.
But for the style of music that I do, I almost like that rawness there naturally, especially in guitar-based stuff. I can't imagine like listening to like an early, Clash record, and if it didn't have that kind of lo-fi element to it, that where we weren't quite there yet, but there's that specific frequency of those recordings that feel home to you.
Yeah.
So I don't go out of my way to go lo-fi, but I try to get being an electronic artist as natural as I can to what I would be live.
Okay.
And there's energies in different ways that are different than going into it in just a regular one guy with a synthesizer vibe. So that energy you talk about, I think I got that across pretty well on Two Clouds for Comfort. I did the solo on it in like one take. And I did a lot of different, I was touring. I had played those songs on tour for about a year and a half before I recorded them. And I tracked them in various hotels and friends' places across a period. Of my old partner in another project I was doing called Plague Garden, named Fernando of the band F, he did the mixing and mastering, just kind of realized everything and what they were. And it came out pretty good, I think, for just how lo-fi they all came out. And it led me to the next experiment on the follow-up record I did on this next one, on Human Z and the Silver Vessel. I wanted to do it in the same concept of, I watched Twin Tribes release their album on Spotify pretty much in pairs, just kind of drip fed. And I'm thinking in the direction of where music's kind of heading. The CD's kind of going away the dodo. It's going, it's downloads now. As much as you want to be, it's vinyl and downloads. So we got to figure out new ways of kind of marketing and pushing. I'm all for the concept of releasing an album in an order of songs, but I think to remain competitive, or even to keep your work fresh in people's minds, it's a tighter focus. So you got to release your music quicker. So the experiment was to write 2 songs organically every month from 6 months going into Christmas, or going into Halloween. I'm sorry. And I finished it. I was able to do that, and just from scratch, with the exception of 2 tracks from an EP I did. So that was kind of an interesting experiment to write just kind of on the fly, and just kind of commit to that being the record and letting it evolve along the way. So it was kind of an exercise, a different approach.
Interesting. So, how would you say your approach is to like layering the guitars, bass, synths, vocals, and all of that? Like, do you try to like music first or lyrics, or do you like, hey, lyrics then music?
Oftentimes I'm weird. I'll come down with like a guitar riff or a hook, and then I'll find the time signature, work on it with a metronome, until I find that comfortable pocket that I like it with, and just kind of build on it from there. I don't do numerous guitar tracking. I'm pretty minimalist in that sense. I'm doing it all myself as far as the tracking part, which is going to change on the next record. That's a different. But the creative process is, sometimes I'll have an idea lyrically that I could apply to something, but I'm usually lyrics last. I'll have an idea or a mood I want to create, and I'll come from that perspective of, well, here's an idea. What would that mood be per se,
Okay.
And you try to replicate that concept sometimes. But yeah, that's a good question. I like that.
Yeah. So yeah. So going off that. I one of the things that I really liked is when you would apply synths, you would try to make these like sonic soundscapes. So what's your main, what do you mostly use for synthesizers? Let's do a gear
Yeah, I
rundown
got a
for that.
Moog grandmother.
Okay.
That's pretty much it. And I alternate that between my Moog mini Moog vocoder. So I'll not vocoder, theremin. So I'll you can hook the Moog up to the theremin to the Moog and create different frequencies of sounds, and that's where I got a lot of it. Like on Accident of the Future, there's like this weird droning that's happening through the whole song. And
Yeah.
that was just by accident experimenting between the Moog and it. I think I've used a couple onboard things in Logic from here and there for some sparkle on the last record. But since I got the grandmother, I've been pretty much just shaping its variables and frequencies into the last record as it came. And strangely, since I got it, it's been more of I'm finding myself writing from almost a synth level now. Going in the next record, I think I'm going to be experimenting more in synth melody first as opposed to guitar. And it's almost like it's giving my creativity almost like an inside out feeling from being some guitar based for so long, which I
Gotcha.
found kind of interesting. Yeah.
Interesting. So, so how would you say you compose a riff? Like, is it basically just an idea pops in your head, or do you sometimes have to like sort of just force yourself to do it in like an experiment or something like that?
Yeah. Um, it depends. I found myself, I for some reason when I get into a writing jag, it's usually about songs of four. I get like four different ideas that I'm bouncing in between with my ADHD. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but sometimes like during the exercise I was doing for going into the last record, the month would come up and something had happened in my private life, and I really got to dig deep and kind of pull something out. So my fallback has always been the guitar. I can put on a pair of headphones. I got the bitch and Wazoo Boss headphone things I can play guitar into, and I love it. Highly recommend it. And I can just riff until I find that riff, and then hopefully it takes off. The trick over years is just to know when to walk away from something, because you could really come up with an idea and over embellish. I think over develop that idea to where it's almost contrived now, So
Really?
I found that, yeah, personally, it's almost to where you have an idea for a song, you want to write this riff, you get a good first part of the riff, but then if that original, if you're not getting it down, I say within the first 3 hours, for me personally, I'm revisiting it with a lot of kind of, I'm not as excited about it if it didn't all come out at once, because then I'm almost trying too hard to, as opposed to just kind of letting my subconscious carry it through. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
Um, it feels right. It's like when you find that riff or that groove on bass. I played bass as my main instrument for years, and you could write in with a guitar player, you could follow the roots of the song or just kind of imitate them, or you could really find that one counter melody that makes the song. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
And you can drive yourself nuts sometimes if the song doesn't necessarily allow for that. You know and I think in the same context with over trying to write into something, forcing yourself to write, it's an exercise, and it's a great way to kind of work through any kind of writer's block. But for me personally, it comes a much more kind of personal in a weird way. It's almost a feeling. Something like something will move me. Like I'll walk outside and the combination of smells and wind will hit you, and you'll be like, that gives me that feeling from like the end of fucking Breakfast Club or some weird shit. And you can kind of know what that sound is, that 80s kind of that kind of weird shit. Or I'm thinking of Iron Maiden fucking Power Slave, or something, and I want to do that Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner riff. I want something in that signature. You always have like in your mind an idea to go to, but then sometimes if it's just not hitting you that way, you could over engineer it. It's
Interesting.
I just find that's in my own creativity. I found there's a fine line, there's a fine balance.
So would you think so with the idea of walking away, like when it comes to being creative, like the hardest thing for you or for anyone in your opinion is just knowing when to say, this is the riff, this is how we're gonna play it, this is how it's gonna sound, like we're done.
Especially as a guitar player, I think it's a discipline in itself.
Okay.
Because I've worked with some fantastic guitar players, and and the more naturally talented they are, the more insecure they tend to be. So they'll always want to overcomplicate the riff, even if it's something really simple. It's like sometimes in its simplest, purest form, that's the way to keep it. Let that riff be what it is, as opposed to trying to, make it a really complicated piece. I see that a lot. It's a good discipline. I think also one of the things from this last record that I did that was a nice exercise was committing to writing 2 songs and releasing them and letting them go. because you can really over stick too long on one song. I believe you can over, and and you lose your original intention. So it's almost just like letting it pass through you, letting it getting on tape, having enough, of whatever it is, just to let that piece go into the world. That's a practice of non-attachment in its own right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's I no, I mean, and I play in a band over here in DC. I play in a simple like German thrash metal band. So whenever we write
Nice.
riffs, yeah, whenever we write riffs, it's always just like, what does this sound like? Does this sound evil enough? All right, cool, done, move on.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's kind of the beauty. Yeah. If you have that chemistry, and that's another thing in bands,
yeah,
is, having that kind of chemistry is priceless. Knowing to recognize the chemistry that you have creatively with other people
yeah.
is priceless. And again, I'm 50 doing this, and time is not really of the essence to really be trying to recreate new chemistry. So you either have a great chemistry or you don't. I believe in music. I
Wow.
think it's a big deciding factor of those bands that kind of stay the course and have something as they recognize, and they're able to nurture, that those strengths about themselves without ego or attachment or that kind of stuff. So yeah, when you're talking about you guys collectively being able to say that sounds great, leave it as that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I that is a good that is a that is the idea behind being creative, is being able to, like, as you said, walking away just saying this is how it's gonna sound, we're done, time to
Yeah,
move on to the next
yeah.
thing.
Knowing when to walk away from a recording, from a song, knowing when that's as good as I'm going to get this, without now and I've seen the same thing happen with music production, is really fantastic engineers, musicians, straight through people sitting on songs for 5-6 years because they need that one special plug-in to make the room sound bigger. You know what I mean? It gets insane. It's a
Yeah.
rabbit hole that if you're not careful, you could really go down, as opposed to being able to collectively look away either as a solo engineer or a band and recognize this is the song, sell it, done,
Oh,
move
okay.
on, you know.
That makes sense. Well, you were telling me that Redwing
That'd be fun.
Blackbird is the combination of a culmination of what you've done over the course of your career. So let's go from the beginning. What inspired you to play music, and what specifically inspired you to play like dark music? Not necessarily like goth, metal, or punk, just dark music in general.
Well, my father was a primary influence on that. He was a jazz musician, so growing up listening to his stuff, and the greats like Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, all those guys. There was always that coming up. So music always had a great place of importance for me as a young kid. But the song, weirdly enough, that made me want to be a musician, I decided that this is what I want to do. I was riding in a car with my dad and my uncle, and I think it was Peter Gabriel's "Shock the Monkey" came on, and I knew, for whatever that was, that energy of that moment just said, "This is what I want to do," and it's always what I've picked up on since. And then I got my dad turned me on to guitar. This was the early '80s, so everybody and their brother played guitar. I found out I would learn more if I was the bass player. So we started, and that was like at the height of early, the early Van Halen, Ozzy, all that stuff. My first concert was seeing Randy Rhoads,
Oh,
uh,
that's
six
awesome.
months before he died. My aunt took me. So
Wow.
I had that, and I didn't realize it at the time, of what I was seeing. It was like, wow, Ozzy's got a cool new band, according to my uncle. I think I was 12 at the time.
Yeah.
He was playing at a state fair in Phoenix. So, I always had a lot of music around me in my thing. At the same time, I've always had kind of I've always a dark attraction to, dark events growing up. Be it horror films or the macabre. I've always been fascinated, with that kind of stuff. And so it was a gradual progression. We got kind of over, the whole Kiss and all that kind of, era of rock and roll in the '80s, and then the glam period kind of hit. It was straight to punk rock at that point for me, and that was when we started listening to the Dead Kennedys and doing that kind of, yeah, it was like that early. And then I remember specifically it was like DRA made the crossover record, and
Yeah,
that was
that
right in
record's
high
awesome.
school. Yeah, 5-year plan hit, and
Yeah.
everyone in high school the punks could hang out with the metal guys respectably now.
Yeah.
That was the change of like the cultural dynamic of teenage America at that time, at least in the music scenes. So and then it was just from that, and then having things happen in high school directly. Friends of mine, I saw a friend of mine, Phil Wren from Sacred Reich. I bought my first
Wait, you knew Phil Ryan from Sacred Reich back in the
Yeah,
day?
the same probation officer in Scottsdale, Arizona. He got put on probation. He'll probably hate me for telling this, but as juvenile delinquents, he just joined Sacred Reich, and he was finishing off probation for stealing, I believe it was eyeliner. And I bought my first bass amp from that guy, a Yamaha JX50B, right as they were starting to take off with Flotsam. Flotsam and Jetsam were rivals here in the Phoenix, Arizona scene.
Yep.
I'm, at the time, I'm like 15, 16, little, whatever. These were the guys we looked up to in high school, a little bit ahead of us. Yeah. And we started seeing them getting picked up by Metal Blade Records and seeing them going, and then suddenly the big change was, Jason Newsted of Flotsam went to Metallica. I was in alternative high school, and I remember when he was pumping gas in Mesa, Arizona, going to his Flotsam shows with Megadeth at Rockers in like the early 80s. So it was like literally watching guys from your neighborhood obtain a music career,
Yeah.
So that was my introduction and my commitment into music from that point on. It was always something as a bass player I did seriously, not seriously. It transcended marriages. It transcended a lot in my life. And so yeah, that was like how I got it. That was my early roots of it all. So
wow.
So Phil and I went to Coronado High School in Scottsdale, Arizona, the same high school they filmed the first Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure movie, which is yeah. So you had all of that happening in our teenage universe.
Wow.
So yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy, man. But it's great because my girlfriend's son, he's now getting into, he's 20 and he's getting into and a lot of those great early metal bands from the 80s are still kicking ass and they're making it on his battle jacket.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Right. It's fantastic to see, what I can see the beginning of thrash and death metal and all that. What started changing for me in Redwing Blackbird was I was looking for, something. I caught wind of Bauhaus. My dad took me to a film called The Hunger, and this really trippy ass fucking band I saw, Bauhaus, freaked me out. Just that on the screen, the Bela Lugosi's thing. I think I was 14 at that point, and that was like my introduction to kind of the alternative kind of vibe. There's the Bauhaus, and then it led into Skinny Puppy on the industrial side of stuff. And it was like there's a whole subculture here that was really alluring, in all of it. So, just as all that was happening, I hit my mid-20s just as like the whole alternative music thing exploded. And, there was always something new and fresh happening musically. And it felt like things were really changing in the 90s, consciously in a way. We had first George Bush, first war in Iraq, all that kind of stuff. And the reaction to it, Jello Biafra's spoken word records, all that kind of stuff happening. So there was always, for me in music, it always kind of walked parallel with politics if I was going to do something more extreme musically. If I was going to play something heavier or more darker, I always wanted to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can always play folk and write, country songs, but, I always felt that was a better medium for my creativity. And it was easier to play. Playing goth and death rock is 50 times easier on guitar than trying to learn fucking Apregios from Hell by Yngwie Malmsteen. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
And that's who, that's where it was heading. It was like, holy shit, there's like, the bar is set so high as guitar players in the metal scene, even in the thrash spectrum. It's like, those guys are Olympic level players. And, other artists in those genres like Roland S. Howard, Daniel Ash, even Robert Smith, those guys kind of showed a more of a DIY approach to being able to express yourself through the instrument. You know what I mean? Melodically and really beautifully and honestly.
Yeah. I was going to add to your list Geordie Walker from Killing Joke if you're into his guitar playing as well.
Absolutely. It's it's definitely in there.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Well, so like, so okay, so what was your first band and what music did you guys play? And then like, how did that evolve into like whatever else you were doing in your music career?
Sure. The first band that I like actually joined in high school was a metal band, and my buddy Bill Siegel, he went on. I got in a lot of trouble as juvenile hall. He went on and did great things. Now he's like the A&R contact man for Fender Music in Scottsdale. He
That is
spent,
sick.
yeah, he's had a great career musically on the business side. Prior to that, he was like George Lynch's guitar tech for a couple albums. Yeah. So in Lynch Mob and coming out of Doc, and he was like, he was like his lackey. He just went in as an intern, and George pretty much trained him. And he got a really good reputation in the whole music system, and went on to Fender. So I was in a band with him originally in high school, and then from there, it was a series of punk bands. Like I said, I was getting in a lot of trouble in and out of high school, drop out, whatnot. Turned 18, and this fantastic singer out of Seattle was doing a goth band called Flesh of My Flesh, and he had just disbanded that on and they just had they did a cover. They just got contracted to cover Marianne by the Sisters of Mercy on Cleopatra Records under Flesh of My Flesh. And he did that, and then that band disbanded, and we formed Second Skin, and that was out of Phoenix, Arizona. It got a pretty good strong following. The 4 years I was with them, we did a lot of crazy shows. We played with, first show I did with them, well, the first show that we actually played was with Christian Death. Not Christian Death, I'm sorry. Shadow Project with Roz. So
Nice.
that was like an immediate trial by fire. From there, we played with Death in June. We
Wow.
Love Spit Love. We had a lot of fantastic shows. The last show I played with them was with Low Pop Suicide and the Swans. And that was when me and Mark kind of left and went kind of a different direction. Just inner immaturity of a band. But Aaron carried it on. Aaron Reamer went on to carry Second Skin to this day, and does good stuff. There's another band out of LA. They're a synth pop band called Second Skin, and there is, they're in direct conflict of copyright law. So,
Wow.
they as soon as they respond to the cease and desist letters, hopefully we can come to a nicer agreement. But our Second Skin's been documented going back to like 1992 in Mick Mercer's books and with the Library of Congress. So it just sucks that those things kind of happen in this day and age. But yeah, that's separate. That was where I started. And so playing live comfortably was in Second Skin, playing goth, death rock, that kind of heavy stuff. As the more I wanted to learn about my instrument was when I moved away and worked with the guitar player from that band, a guy named Mark Erickson. And we went on to form a band called Color Store, which was more shoegaze, more. This was like when Radiohead was taking over fucking everybody. You know what I mean? And it was like
Gotcha.
changing. And every goth I knew then had a secret, either a secret Moby CD or a Radiohead CD in their collection. That was like their guilty pleasure,
Yeah.
We just kind of went, there was just a little changing of the tide once again, So it was that time period. We were trying to do more stuff. We made Mark made 3 fantastic records, and unfortunately, he passed away in 2012. So, yeah, he was a 15-year collaborator. And that was kind of a big blow. So I think a little bit more of that kind of loss in life, and seeing so much of that happening. This is the same time period where, our contemporaries like Elliott Smith had just passed away. You had Mark Linkus from Sparkle Horse, all by their suicides. So there
Yeah.
was a big epidemic of that was happening, and it hit that close to home with Mark's passing in Color Store, and it kept me out of music for about a good 2 years. I got reinvented or reintroduced. My neighbor across the street needed a bass player in a folk Americana band, and I joined. I just to learn a new style. Plus, had learned from an uncle of mine, like old country guitar, while he tried to learn fiddle. So I had a pretty good, repertoire already from, being 12 and being forced to learn Hank Williams songs and whatnot. You get an idea of the time signature. So I did that for a little while. And that was when I started to feel more that I was playing music more age appropriately, as opposed to, like almost it was like playing. It seemed like that's what everybody was doing. You had like the guys from Social Distortion suddenly making folk records.
Yeah.
Everybody was kind of going the Americana route,
Yeah.
slowing down, that kind of thing. So, I was 44 at that point, and it's kind of like, I still got a lot of energy. I still want to do more artistic kind of based, expressions in work, and that's kind of where I started flirting with the idea. I've always been pretty a political junkie to most extent. So I wanted to be a little bit less, I want to be more outspoken, I guess, in that sense, artistically. So I think that's where Redwing Blackbird pretty much kind of came. Again, it was kind of a culmination of so many different ideas I put on the back burner while working with other people. You know,
So Redwing Blackbird, in a
is
sense,
that a
is
long enough rant?
no, you're good. I mean, I'm
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 sorry.
I'm happy with it. No, you're good. You're good, Paul. I was gonna say, so
Right,
to you,
right.
would Redwing Blackbird be like a catch-all for all your artistic ideas that you sort of had to suppress?
Yeah, in a way, like I said, I was always a bass player. Coming up in my 20s, I was that was my main instrument for so many years. It wasn't until about 6 years ago I started really seriously switching over to guitar and writing from that instrument when I decided I wanted to be the center of that circle. I'd
Okay.
always worked in good bands that had a solid center of the circle as a songwriter. I contributed to it in kind of a percentage. That was always the dynamic I was in. But I always had ideas that like wouldn't necessarily work for that project that I had hung on to. And Redwing Blackbird kind of, as the technology grew to where I could program my own beats, to where I could competently record, things live to play along with it, sound fantastic. I could create now with technology that same live energy that a 5-piece can do, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and you can do it like artistically now, where it's not just a guy on a laptop, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can do a lot of sample pounding. You can do a lot of different. There's so many different approaches to it, and it's almost becoming an art form within itself. You
Yeah.
know, I was watching
Well,
Kurt Mackey do his live show, and the way he has everything laid out is fantastic and really clever. And it's definitely the future. I think of where music is kind of heading. Where you're going to start seeing artists like yourself be like, I can do a whole live one-man performance, and do it well.
interesting. So you think foregoing so obviously I'm assuming Redwing Blackbird you use a drum machine when you play, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So do you think that there is a difference when you use a drum machine versus a live drummer?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I miss the ability to like, with a live drummer, you always have the ability to have that dynamic to where you could take it a few more measures longer, or you could slow it down and you could build up again, and you can do that. In a lot of, most of the time with drum machine, it's that same, there's always that mechanization.
Yeah.
What I'm finding in a lot of the drum programs I've been working with in Logic is you have abilities now to add elements of swing to it that you would get from a natural drummer.
Yeah.
But it's still not quite there yet. Like you still don't have that eye to eye command when you want to do something live. You don't
Yeah.
have that ability to glow, but you do have. It has its pros and cons. You know.
Yeah.
I miss. There's I'll probably work again in another project, maybe with my daughter who's killing it on violin right now, but in
Nice.
something more organic based to where that would be more of the emphasis. But um it's almost like within like industrial music to a certain extent, or like early Big Black, or
Oh
those
yeah.
type of energy. You know what I mean? Where you had
Yeah.
that, just that drive. And I wanted that a big part of Redwing Blackbird, like naturally, And the drum machine kind of came out of a means to an end, but it's definitely in my programming that now that I have a good grasp at it, that's going to be the sound of it. I don't see, maybe an additional percussionist, but I'll always have that mechanical feeling there to work off of, because
Yeah.
you know what
That
makes it
makes
sound.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see like with the drum machine it sounds heavier and just more it sounds more mechanical, heavier, more grating, like like Godflesh or like early Swans,
Yes,
even though early Swans you had an actual drummer, but it has that, dung
yeah,
ga
power,
dung
yeah.
ga like it hits a certain way that a human drummer can do, but when it's a drum machine it just it sounds better to put it bluntly.
It can, and live. like I travel with way more gear than I probably need. I have a full PA, an EV with a sub that I like to have on stage with me. So I drive sound guys nuts because I'm sending, but the technology I have, it's called a cymatic LP 16, and it's a 16 track wave player that with the program I can bounce a file out of Logic, and I can isolate the bass, I can isolate the drums, I can isolate my synth to individual tracks within the wave, and then drop it into the LP16 and send individual lines out for each instrument, just the same as you would with a live band, which is fantastic. You know,
Gotcha.
yeah. So with that technology, it's a lot of fun. You can get the same wall of sound as if I'm playing, as a separate, everything's separated. And if you're confident in your sound, man, it makes the show all the more better. But half the time, they're just taking a left and a right from me and then dumping a bunch of compression on me and saying, go for it. But you can get away with it, fortunately.
Yeah.
So, I'm seeing more individual players similar to, or even in pairs, like the She Passed Away guys or the Twin Tribes guys. You're seeing more of that. And I think you're going to see more of the individual players as well, as, it's
So
definitely a new movement to some extent.
for sure. I was gonna say with Redwing Blackbird, so who have you played with Redwing Blackbird, and do you have any fond memories from the shows that you've played with your band so far?
Oh yeah, I mean it's been I've had we did one of the first shows I did in Red Wing Blackbird was the one that stands out the most is meeting Mick from Pink Turns Blue. I got to open for them their first trip to America, and he was out of he didn't have an amp, he just had his pedal collection, and he borrowed, I have a Vox AC30 that he chose to borrow, and he just dialed, he's like, how to use one of these, and showed me the correct way that to use a Vox AC30. It was fantastic of just zeroing everything out and just getting the best chime out of your pedal board. So that was really kind of cool to have, that. Getting to play with Spear of Destiny, which is Kirk
Brandon.
Brandon.
Yep.
Yeah, he was fantastic. And then meeting, those guys was exceptional. And knowing that's kind of like, you have Adrian Portnoy, who's or Porty, who's the guitarist from Sex Gang Children and early New Model Army, was on tour with them. And you got, the bass player from the Mission and New Model, or Sisters of Mercy. So it's like, these guys are the fucking real deal. They're
Yeah.
out there still doing pubs. Sweet, really cool stuff. So that
Nice.
was an honor to play with those
Nice.
guys. But yeah, Michael Aston working with Gene Loves Jezebel was fantastic. Playing with him and his son on the dates that we did before the shutdown was really cool, because you learn from the older generation in this line of work. When you get on the road with these guys.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's been a good trip so far.
Nice. So I know you did. I know, like when we were trying to schedule the interview, I was talking to UTM Music. They told me you were on tour in Austin, like earlier in the year. How were those? Were you? Was it Austin? Was that just a one off, or were you doing a small tour?
No, what happened was the Austin thing actually came up. My father passed away, so I was down there
Oh.
visiting my mother. What happened was we did a fantastic show in here in Denver for October with Curse Mackey. It was the Saturday Night Exorcism show we did at the HQ Club here, and that went off really well. It was a lot of fun. And then we had a tour set up, but due to COVID, it shut us down. So that's going to be repicked up again. So I ended up going down to Texas to visit my mother because my father passed away in July. So that was fine at the time. We were going to figure out what we were going to do with his cremains and whatnot. So that was kind of that. It wasn't so much of a tour,
Oh, my
but it was
bad.
kind of an interesting to go out and just kind of see. Oh, you're fine. No,
My bad. My bad.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you're perfectly fine. But it was an interesting way to get down into Texas and to kind of see other scenes firsthand, and see how other communities were bouncing back from COVID. You know,
Gotcha. Yeah.
um, yeah.
So okay, so when it comes to touring, you've obviously told me that you've played like you were used to going like Albuquerque, Austin, Texas,
Yeah.
and then West LA. Did you have you ever done a full on like United States Let's Go the entire East, West, South, North, Midwest tour? Have you ever done a full
Been
US
as
tour?
far Midwest so far as I'm not looking at a map, but I was all the way as far. I think we made it out to Ohio, Columbus, Ohio.
Okay,
It was about that was a few years ago. Before Redwing Blackbird, I was still playing a lot of folk and Americana then.
gotcha.
But it's always been pretty much the southwestern, northwest United States. Done
Okay,
shows up in Portland, Seattle, San Francisco.
I've never been to any of those places.
Right.
I
It's interesting because it's almost as when you're independent, you get content working the patterns that in your part of the country.
yeah
You probably have a plethora of information between Washington, New York, all that whole of
yeah.
So, but I've known artists who've never made it this far out to Denver so far. It's like, God, why didn't I hear about you 10 years ago? You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
you never knew existed, and they never leave that part of the country. And we're
Yeah.
so big.
Yeah, I mean it's funny with when it comes to playing certain routes. I know some bands that going to the West Coast for them is a vacation. Like going past like
Sure.
Chicago is a vacation. Like they have to
Yeah.
take vacation days off. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
so to
Yeah.
me it's kind of interesting. So how would you say like a certain crowd reacts to Redwing Blackbird in like Albuquerque compared to LA or Austin?
Oh wow. Well, the contrast that I was in, not so much Albuquerque. Albuquerque is pretty good.
Okay.
The shows that I played there, we Long Hair Records last time I played there, and we played at the Tumbleroot Brewery with Gene Loves Jezebel, and that was fantastic. There's an undercurrent there of our Gen Xers who recognize these bands and does well there. Going out to someplace like Norman, Oklahoma, and doing it is a completely different story, man. And I've done that. I played a place called the Brickyard, to where it was like country night, and I was playing with my son-in-law's band at the time, and they're looking at you sideways, and I'm giving it like everything to these people, and
Yeah.
so there's from regionally, it's a good way to test material. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I know that some of the stuff that I was doing on the first record were translating really well up in San Francisco and in LA and stuff. And then the songs that also translated, those same songs, that if they were translating really well energy wise, like um in Oklahoma or even down in Kansas or wherever, Kirby's beer store or whatever, you would know that that's a keeper. You know what I mean? You know when to place that, or
Yeah.
you kind of develop, you make mental notes to yourself. Okay, if I can get away with doing this one here in Wichita, this is going to kill it in Tulsa. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. No, that's
you learn to
interesting.
read the room in a weird way too. It's interesting. I had a hard time playing folk and Americana stuff when I was just doing that, because you don't know if you're reading a room of a bunch of like Trump supporters, which is 90.9% of the time in Nebraska what you're playing for.
Yeah.
So, you want to kind of tone it down and be a little bit more personable in your not be so outspoken, if you will. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean you gotta know
you know
you
your
gotta be
room. Yeah.
yeah, you gotta be
Yeah.
situationally aware of where you're at. Because if you spew if you talk the anti-Trump politics and whatnot to a crowd in Nebraska or Norman, Oklahoma, they're gonna say get out. Like,
Yeah, it can. Yeah, you can go too far with it, definitely.
yeah.
And yeah, it's a trip. It's interesting. I've worked with guys who read the region of the country. They've been doing it for so long, and they'll be like, they'll play to those types of people. They'll play up to them, jokingly, but all this, just kind of, you can have fun with it. But yeah, Red Wing Blackbird, I've been pretty careful where and who, and the bills when I'm going into the Midwest, of what I was really looking forward to doing. That we were going to do a run up to Detroit, to Chicago, and down to Indiana. I was looking forward to the Indiana show and Black Circle Brewery, but that got canceled because of the COVID kind of situations and whatnot.
Yeah.
But just to kind of read, and there's so many great bands coming out of like the Kentucky Vampires from that part of the country, and then you have Scary Black, which is Albie Mason's work, fantastic, individual solo artist guy. And I think he's coming out of Kentucky as well. So you got to hand it to these guys who are doing like the full death rock, androgynous, traditional show in places that can be kind of dangerous to do it in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the very least, the one thing I will say, I'm not to make you feel old. I'm 24. A lot of the bands you're talking about are way before I was even alive. I know who they are. Don't get me
Sure.
wrong. I know who they are, but I will say, I think with like a lot of the newer generation, because people like me, we aren't like my people my own age. I've noticed this. I feel the same way. Like we aren't really drawn like tied down by genre factions as it was like in the
No,
80s. Like,
absolutely. I was going to say that.
yeah,
The one thing I'm really proud of, my kids. I have a 28-year-old and a 14-year-old. Um, is their primary, they don't have that segregation musically anymore.
yeah,
It's like, you know you can't listen to punk if you listen to Duran Duran that we
yeah,
had in our generation. you know
yeah,
you would be like, shamed if you admitted to liking Poison and Slayer in the same sentence. There was
yeah,
always, but like with your guys' generation, not to old man down on you,
yeah. You're
they're
good.
much more open. you know like it's perfectly fine if you dig. I'm noticing that with my girlfriend's son. He'll go from loving Amon Amarth to Taylor Swift, and showing respect. Say,
Yeah.
hey, that's still an artist. They don't have that hate that our generation had. It's a really beautiful thing to see. you know
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to say it's like with like it's just cool. It's interesting to me to see like goth bands like popping up in like Kentucky as you're saying
yeah,
where there is a risk of looking androgynous,
sure.
Whereas like in LA that like you could get away with doing stuff like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, the open-mindedness of younger musicians is exceptional, I think.
Yeah.
um it's definitely something to learn from.
For sure. So so you it's very obvious to me. You follow the goth scene. You follow what's happening in your town. You follow what's happening in like the country overall and the world overall for goth. Who would
Yeah.
you say are your five favorite current goth bands from like what's happening right now?
What's going down right now?
Yeah,
um I'm gonna say, the Swans are always on top of what he does. I'm a lifelong fan of them. Michael Jair is amazing.
yeah. He's crazy too.
Yeah, he is. He's an interesting person, very
Yes,
interesting.
yes, he is.
um but Woven Hand, I think David Eugene Edwards is an unsung hero here. You're gonna make me go five, huh? I think there's some fantastic stuff being done with a lot of I right now. I don't know if you would say so much that they're goth, but I'm really like what Boy Harsher's been bringing to the table as an electronic act.
They're really good.
There's a freshness to it. It's like bringing back that Eurythmics vibe that's really fantastic. They've been on the play. Like right now, I'm excited to go want to see what they do live. You know what I mean?
They are really fun live. I've
Yeah,
seen them.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to seeing that. And I love, I'm a diehard of just from my childhood, but I love seeing these Bauhaus reunions of that lineup just coming out and killing it. So
Did they play Denver, right? You were at
yeah,
that?
yeah. He's Peter has been through on his Jubilee and his a couple things, and then finally they announced the reunion show, and then COVID hit and shut us down. So we
Yeah.
missed out. But I've seen their other one, Phoenix, back right after he did the big Coachella reunion. So it's always cool to see those guys reunite and do stuff in the
Gotcha.
black scene. Um, I think there's a lot of really cool new stuff coming out. Um, Nick Cave, the Bad Seeds are always fantastic.
Nice.
That's been his work. His whole career has been a huge influence to me. That guy
Yeah.
doesn't make bad records.
No, he does not.
I'm trying to think of who's really moved me from more of an independent level of late. And I would have to say here in Denver, I thought like what Church Fire is doing is really unique and really, really bold, brave in a lot of cool ways. I think I gave you four, and on I know I'm missing someone that's like right now is like, how did you not say that? But yeah, I would have to look. I don't,
She passed
um,
away. Are they in your top five?
oh, absolutely, fantastic band, definitely up there. And I know that by saying that, I'm probably overlooking. Let me look at my um,
Take your
50
time.
other bands who are just equally as fantastic as that are bringing it all to life. Um, I thought what King Dude was doing for a couple records is pretty fantastic. He was doing some really interesting stuff. Um, so yeah, a lot of the stuff that's coming off of that whole. I'm trying to think of the label that him and Chelsea Wolfe are all coming off of right now. Um, oh, Sargent House. The
Gotcha.
Sargent House label's got a lot of really interesting, darker stuff that's blowing my mind. Um, yeah, so yeah, those are the kind of stuff that's got caught in my ear of late, if you will.
Nice. I was gonna say, have you heard of a label called Treaty Records? They're based in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That was one label that's been standing out to me as a reason because they'll get all these bands that sound like cold wave bands from like Poland in like the 80s, and
yes,
it's really cool. Like I think you've probably heard of them, Molchat Doma. Do you know who those guys are?
yeah, yeah. I know of
Yeah.
them absolutely.
Yeah.
My PR guy of UTM Music, Michelle Rowland, he's turned me on to everybody. Some fantastic bands. It's like holy crap. That have blown my mind as just being really good, and even his whole repertoire is fantastic. He's been following music for 50 years, as long as
Nice.
I have.
Nice. Well, one
Yeah,
day I'll get up to that level of following music for
you
50 years.
will. I think you're doing fantastic. As you got the journalist thing down to a T, my friend, and
I try.
talk to you. Yeah.
You as well. Well, actually, it's I let me. So in earlier in the interview, you were talking about like the upcoming like Redwing Blackbird interview. Is there anything you want to share about it? Because I'd love to. I'd love for you to like ramble on and let you know and let us know what you're up to.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm actually to a point where I'm just kind of focusing on getting some dates together to get out live. You know, um,
Come to the East Coast, man.
I definitely will. Absolutely. I'll send an email. I'm looking at clubs that I don't need to make $1 million or whatever, just enough to get to the next date, and I'll connect the dots. I think that's going to be the best help creatively for a lot of us. So I'm looking forward. That's what I'm kind of switching gears towards, is leaving the bubble of Denver, while at the same time just trying to maintain what you've established here as part of it. Pushing the record. My record's on Bandcamp. Redwing Blackbirds, Human Z and the Silver Vessel, intergalactic concept record. I'm pretty proud of.
Sound all the songs were killer on it when I was listening to it. I
Thank
enjoyed
you,
it.
thank you, Vivek. Yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. That makes my yeah. Um, but yeah, so just kind of focusing on getting it out, and just taking it to the streets, in the word of the Doobie Brothers, and not to date myself,
No, you're
but
good.
yeah. So there's that's kind of what I'm. There's a time to where I don't want to overdo it creatively, and I think with social media, there's this constant pressure for artists to always be producing something.
Yeah.
So I think there's a balance that you got to kind of focus on focusing on the live side of things, to where you're content in your live performance and in your own chops, and not going too far down the rabbit hole of worrying about how many likes you're getting. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because it can get really unhealthy. Because I
Yeah.
know as most artists, we are somewhat sensitive, and that whole illusion of Facebook's likes and success can be very misleading to our psyche.
Yeah. Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah, so not maintaining that balance of not always feeling like you have to be constantly producing something is just as equally important of knowing when to create. So kind of switching gears right now, coming out. Hopefully this fucking pandemic shit goes away, and just
Hopefully,
focusing on
man.
the life. Yeah,
Hopefully, I did my part. I got vaccinated. I'm waiting to get my booster shot, so
I'm
I'm
doing
just
the same thing.
I'm
I got vaccinated, and it's terrifying, the mentality of why people won't do it.
yeah.
It's a whole nother conversation, but
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know, um, sure. I think, yeah,
Well, so in terms of like for the fans that want to come see you live, what would give us a hint at what it'd be, not what to expect, because obviously like I remember I asked I prior to this I did an interview with Keith Morris from the Circle Jerks and I asked him what they should expect.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but no, he it was funny. I asked him what like the fans should expect for the tour, and he just went off on me. He's like, well, you shouldn't really ask that because they might spoil it. It was no, he's funny. He was a funny interview actually. But what
I
should the
bet.
but what should like give us a hint of what you think the fans would see when they see Redwing Blackbird live on these upcoming shows that
Well, I use a lot of heavy. I kind of come from the school of what Boris is kind of doing in the visual effect. You know, I love the heavy smoke and the high volume. I use a lot of visuals, so I'm just a guy up there with a synth, a drum machine, and a bunch of fucking speakers. So you
yeah
got to do other things to kind of keep the show. I
yeah
mean, so I got a lot of atmosphere that I try to create, a lot of visual footage that I create. So I want kind of people to almost feel almost a tenseness of like, is this too much smoke in the room? Is this too much volume? Is this, there's always like that I remember seeing in the early 90s, seeing Jane's Addiction play at an old dollar movie theater in Phoenix, early Jane's before they were like signed on the big deal.
gotcha
And there's so many people in the room and so much fucking smoke that it like lifted you out of your shoes. You know what I mean? And you had this fear of, I might not make it through this. And I loved that chaos. So a Redwing Blackbird show, I always try to include some level of tension or chaos, either from the visual side of it or just in the element of surprise in itself. I could see Keith Morris's point because you don't want to sell the farm to people on this tour. You
yeah
know,
yeah
I have a hard time thinking that guy could do anything short of putting on night after night fantastic shows, whether he
yeah
told us about it or not. So
yeah
that's a layer of creativity that's fantastic. But yeah, so I think atmosphere and mood and I have just an important emphasis on that as just in the material itself. So live shows, that's what I got to work in making sure it's seamless and goes well. You know.
for sure for sure. So the art of the live show is what you are mostly focused on right now as of this current moment.
Yeah. I'm coming out of a recording mindset and a tracking mindset into how's the most intense way I could get this song to its best energy.
Yeah.
And that's there's a layer of theatrics and all of that kind of stuff that can come into play, especially when you're just one guy. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
a school in live settings to where I just like to be on the brink of disaster in everything I do. Like I'll set up my synthesizer just slightly out of reach of the length of my guitar cable so that I got to make that extra effort not to unplug myself. And that keeps me in the moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I got a lot of different weird shit that I do live like that kind of always teeters on the brink of failure. And
Nice.
that tension kind of comes across in the music in its own way, in an interesting way. You know?
That's no, that's interesting. It's like when you play a show, there's a lot at stake for you, when you do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can make it almost too easy to yourself to where you're just going through the motions. You know what I mean? To
Yeah.
where I'm just hitting the sample here when, and it's obvious I'm just going through step A, step B, and C. But when I kind of set things up, teetering on, like my synthesizer balances on an old man's walker. So if I'm not careful, that thing's going to tumble over into the fucking stage,
Yeah.
So, there's always those types of things that I'm always trying to work on the edge of it, but it keeps you sharp and it keeps you alert.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So, one final question I'll ask you is how did the name Redwing Blackbird form? It's a
Oh,
very interesting name.
thank you. My youngest daughter and her grandmother had a very close relationship where they would go bird watching. It started for her around the age of 4.
Nice.
And her grandmother passed away from cancer suddenly. Had a and she was, at the time she passed, my daughter was 6, but she inherited this beautiful like knowledge of birds from her grandmother. and her favorite bird was a Redwing Blackbird. Both of their favorite birds were. So it's
Nice.
kind of tributary to that moment of that information being passed on to the next generation. I thought it just made sense at the time. So and it stuck. So, I don't have to name it after myself. I don't have to do anything weird like that. I can put this stuff under a bird that I think is absolutely an interesting creature, and it has this symbolism in my to my daughter.
Yeah.
So that's where I came as like, that's a really cool bird. And suddenly when I realized I learned of the bird, I started noticing the bird in my day-to-day activities here in Colorado, which was weird. So it was like, you know.
It was a sign. It was like
Yeah.
the red. Literally, it was a sign. Go name your band this.
I think it really was in a sense. Yeah. It
Right
was a
on.
moment for certain.
Right on. Well, so that's basically all the questions I have for you.
Been
Let
great. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I
No,
apologize.
you were fine.
Yeah.
You were fine, Paul. This was fun. This was a lot easier for me because some questions I could straight up just ditch and then give you cool follow-up questions to, for you to ramble more on about. But so yeah, so that's basically it. Thanks again, guys, for listening to Punk Punk Goose. Oh wait, actually no, before we go. So, Paul Baker of Redwing Blackbird, you can check out his album. You can check out the album Humans and the Silver Vessel on his Bandcamp, Redwing Blackbird at bandcamp.com.
Correct. A
Cool.
quick way to do it is just go to redwingblackbird.org, O-R-G, and then it'll take you to my website, and the click will take you right through from there. So as opposed to Bandcamp, I'm also on Spotify under Redwing Blackbird on all streaming platforms. But I invite all and everyone to sign up on my website, and that is a great help as far as to regionally determine where I travel next. So
Do you also have a Facebook page for Red Wing Blackbird?
I do,
Okay.
and Paul Baker or Redwing Blackbird. Those are either or. You get just as much information on my personal page at Paul Baker as my Redwing Blackbird. I've never really committed one to over the other, so
For sure,
yeah.
for sure. Well, there you go, guys. Support Paul Baker and Red Wing Blackbird. A really cool experiment in goth, post punk, and industrial, and the way it's all fused and interconnected. And that's it for this week. Thanks again for listening to Punk Punk Goose on 88.1 FM, WMUC in College Park, Maryland. Goodbye.